The blizzard had been howling for 2 hours when Greta first noticed the cold seeping through every crack in the stone cottage. And she knew with a certainty that settled like ice in her stomach that Owen would try to make it home tonight no matter what the weather threw at him. She had lived in the borderlands long enough to understand that human men carried a particular brand of stubbornness when it came to promises. And Owen Nakamura had promised her he would return before nightfall. The wind screamed against the shutters she had already barred twice, and snow piled against the windows in drifts that climbed higher with each passing moment. She wrapped her thick arms around herself, feeling the familiar weight of her green skin beneath the wool tunic she wore, and made a decision that would have seemed mad to anyone else watching. Greta crossed to the heavy oak door and pulled it open against the resistance of the wind. Snow immediately whipped inside, stinging her face and catching in her black hair that she kept braided down her back. The cold was brutal, the kind that could kill a man in less than an hour if he were caught unprepared, and she knew Owen had only taken his regular traveling cloak when he left for the trading post that morning. He had kissed her forehead in that gentle way he had developed over the months they had been together, promised he would be back for supper, and headed out into what had been merely cloudy skies. Neither of them had expected the storm to blow in with such ferocity. She propped the door open with the iron doorstop they kept for summer evenings, then dragged the heavy bench from beside the fireplace to wedge against it for extra support. The wind immediately began its assault on her home, but she positioned herself in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, her body blocking the worst of the snow from entering while still leaving the opening visible. If Owen was out there stumbling through the white curtain of the blizzard, he would need to see the light. She had built up the fire before opening the door, and now the orange glow spilled out into the darkness, a beacon in the storm. The first hour was the hardest. The cold bit through her clothes and found every inch of exposed skin. Her fingers grew numb where she gripped the doorframe, and her face felt like it had been scraped raw by invisible knives. Ice formed on her small tusks, and she had to keep moving her jaw to prevent it from freezing solid. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, stomping occasionally to keep the blood flowing, but she never moved from her position. The light had to stay visible. Owen had to be able to find his way home. She thought about the first time she had met him, 6 months ago when spring had been turning the frontier green again. She had been living alone in this cottage for nearly a year, an outcast from her clan for the crime of refusing to raid human settlements. Her mother had been furious, her father disappointed, and her 3 brothers had looked at her like she had betrayed everything they stood for. But Greta had seen too much senseless violence, too many humans killed for simply existing in what the orcs considered their territory. She had walked away from her clan lands with nothing but the clothes on her back and her grandmother's silver bracelet. And she had found this abandoned cottage at the edge of the borderlands where neither orc nor human really held sway. Owen had appeared one morning while she was working in the garden she had started, trying to coax vegetables from the rocky soil. She had heard his footsteps and turned, expecting trouble, her hand already moving toward the axe she kept nearby. But he had stopped a respectful distance away, hands clearly visible and empty, and simply asked if she knew the way to Millbrook. His dark hair had been longer then, falling into his eyes, and he had looked thin, like someone who had been traveling hard for a long time. She had pointed him in the right direction, and he had thanked her with a slight bow that had surprised her. She had thought that would be the end of it, but 3 days later he had returned, this time carrying a heavy pack and walking with obvious exhaustion. He had asked if she knew of any work in the area, any place that might take on a laborer. She had told him the truth, that the humans in Millbrook would not hire him if they knew he had spoken to an orc, and the orcs would kill him on sight for being human. He had laughed at that, a bitter sound, and said that seemed about right for his luck. Then he had asked, very carefully, if she might need help with anything around her property. He was good with his hands, he said, and he could work for food and a place to sleep in her barn if she had one. She should have said no. Every instinct told her that getting involved with a human would only lead to pain. But something in his eyes had made her pause, a kind of desperate honesty that she recognized because she saw it in her own reflection. So she had said yes, he could repair her fence and reinforce her barn roof, and she would feed him and let him sleep in the barn. He had worked for 2 weeks straight, fixing everything that needed fixing and several things she had not even realized were broken. He never asked about her tusks or her green skin or why she was living alone. He simply worked, ate the meals she provided, and slept in the barn. At the end of the 2 weeks, she had asked him why he was really in the borderlands. He had been quiet for a long time, staring at the sunset, and then he had told her. He had been a soldier, part of the king's army sent to fight in the Northern Territories. He had seen things in that war that had broken something inside him, had been ordered to do things that haunted his dreams. When his service had ended, he could not go back to his family's farm, could not pretend to be the same person who had left 5 years before. So he had walked, just walked, until he found himself in the borderlands where maybe he could start over as someone new. She had understood that. She was trying to start over too. So when he had asked if there was more work he could do, she had said yes, and he had stayed. The second hour was worse than the first. The cold had moved past pain into a kind of numbness that scared her. She could no longer feel her toes, and her hands were stiff claws gripping the doorframe. The snow had piled up around her feet, and she had to kick it away periodically to keep from being buried. The wind howled with voices that sounded almost human, and several times she thought she heard someone calling her name, only to realize it was just the storm playing tricks. She thought about the day everything had changed between them. It had been 3 months after Owen had started staying in the barn, and they had fallen into an easy routine. She cooked, he handled the heavy labor, and they worked the garden together. They talked while they worked, sharing stories carefully edited to avoid the worst of their pasts. She learned that he had a younger sister back home who used to make him flower crowns when they were children. He learned that she had always wanted to learn to read, but her clan had considered it useless for an orc woman. That day, she had been carrying a heavy bucket of water from the well when she had slipped on the wet grass. She had gone down hard, the bucket flying from her hands, her ankle twisting beneath her with a pop that she felt more than heard. The pain had been immediate and intense, and she had gasped, unable to stop the sound from escaping. Owen had been beside her in seconds, his hands gentle as he examined her ankle, his face serious with concern. He had helped her into the cottage, settled her by the fire, and wrapped her ankle with strips of cloth soaked in cold water. Then he had done something that had shocked her. He had gone into the kitchen and made dinner. She had tried to protest, to tell him she could manage, but he had waved her off and told her to rest. He had burned the bread and oversalted the stew, and it had been the best meal she could remember eating because someone had made it for her, because someone had cared enough to try. When he had brought her bowl to her, his fingers had brushed hers, and she had felt something spark between them, something warm and dangerous. He had slept in the cottage that night, on the floor near the fire, because he had worried about her being alone with her injury. She had lain awake for hours listening to him breathe, wondering what she was doing, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. But in the morning when she had woken to find him already up and making breakfast, his hair sticking up in all directions and a smudge of flour on his cheek. She had known it was already too late. She was falling for him, this gentle human man who had stumbled into her life. They had not spoken about it at first. Neither of them had wanted to name the thing growing between them, because naming it would make it real, and making it real would mean acknowledging all the reasons it could never work. But the touches had become more frequent, more deliberate. His hand on her shoulder when he passed behind her, her fingers brushing through his hair when he sat near her in the evening. They had started sitting closer together, and then one night he had simply reached out and taken her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and they had sat like that until the fire burned low. The first kiss had happened a week later. They had been working in the garden, and she had said something that made him laugh, really laugh, his whole face lighting up with joy. She had looked at him and felt her heart squeeze in her chest, and before she could think better of it, she had leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. He had frozen for a heartbeat, and she had pulled back, terrified she had ruined everything. But then his hand had come up to cup her face, his thumb gentle against her green skin, and he had kissed her back with a tenderness that had made her want to cry. The third hour was agony. Greta could not feel most of her body anymore, and she was shaking so hard her teeth rattled against her tusks. Ice had formed in her hair and on her eyelashes, and she had to blink constantly to keep her vision clear. The fire behind her was still burning strong, but its warmth could not reach her, stolen away by the hungry wind. Her mind was starting to play tricks on her, showing her images of Owen frozen in a snowbank somewhere, his lips blue, his eyes closed. She shook her head violently, forcing the thoughts away. He was alive. He was coming home. She just had to keep the light burning. She thought about their first real conversation about what they were to each other. It had been a month after that first kiss, and they had been lying together in her bed, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She had asked him what he thought they were doing, if this was just convenience or something more. He had been quiet, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm, and then he had said that he loved her. Simple as that. No qualifications, no conditions. He loved her, and he did not care that she was an orc and he was human. He loved her laugh and her strength, and the way she hummed while she cooked, and the kindness she tried to hide behind gruffness. She had cried then, the first tears she had shed since leaving her clan. She had told him she loved him too, that he had given her something she had thought she would never have, a home that felt like home because he was in it. They had talked through the night about what their future might look like, knowing it would be difficult, knowing they would face hatred from both their peoples. But they had decided together that it was worth it, that what they had found was too precious to let go. Owen had moved into the cottage after that. Not into the barn, into her home, into her bed. They had settled into a life together, figuring out how to blend their different ways and make something new. He had started teaching her to read in the evenings, patient with her frustration, delighted by her quick mind. She had taught him some of the orc fighting techniques she had learned as a girl, and he had taught her some of the songs his mother used to sing. They had become partners in every sense of the word, building a life in their small corner of the borderlands where maybe, just maybe, an orc and a human could love each other in peace. Just when Greta thought she might have to accept that Owen was not coming, that he had found shelter elsewhere or worse, she saw movement in the snow. A dark shape stumbling through the white curtain of the blizzard, moving toward the light she had kept burning. Her heart leaped and she tried to call out, but her voice was a croak, her throat frozen. She forced herself to move, to step forward into the storm, every muscle screaming in protest. It was him. Owen stumbled toward her, his face red with cold, ice clinging to his beard, his whole body shaking. He had wrapped his cloak around something, clutching it to his chest, and when he saw her standing in the doorway, his eyes went wide with horror and relief all at once. He tried to move faster, but his legs were not cooperating, and she met him 3 steps from the door, her arms going around him, half dragging him inside. They collapsed together just inside the threshold, and Greta kicked the door shut behind them with the last of her strength. The sudden absence of the wind was disorienting, and for a moment they just lay there in a heap, breathing hard, neither able to move. Then Owen was struggling to sit up, his hands on her face, his voice hoarse as he said her name over and over like a prayer. "What were you doing?" he demanded, and she could hear the fear and anger mixing in his voice. "You were standing in the door. You could have frozen to death. What were you thinking? You promised you would be home," she managed through chattering teeth. "I had to make sure you could find your way." His face crumpled and he pulled her against him, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You stubborn, magnificent, foolish woman," he whispered into her hair. "I love you so much." She tried to respond, but her body was shutting down, the warmth of the cottage making the cold in her bones more apparent. Owen seemed to realize this at the same time because he was suddenly moving, half carrying her to the fireplace. He stripped off her wet clothes with shaking hands, wrapping her in every blanket they owned, and then he was pressing warm cloths to her hands and feet, rubbing circulation back into her limbs. The pain of feeling returning was excruciating, but she welcomed it because it meant she was alive. Only after he was satisfied that she was warming up did he remember the bundle he had been carrying. He unwrapped his cloak carefully, and Greta saw that he had been protecting a small leather satchel. He opened it with reverent care and pulled out several items wrapped in oilcloth. Books. He had been carrying books through a blizzard. "I know they are just books," he said, his voice rough with emotion and cold. "But when I was at the trading post I found these, and I thought of you. One is a primer for learning letters and the others are stories I thought you might like. I knew you wanted to learn to read better and I thought these might help." He looked up at her and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I could not leave them behind. I knew the storm was getting bad, but I thought I could beat it home. I am sorry. I should have stayed in town. I should not have worried you." Greta reached out with her still clumsy hands and pulled him close, kissing him with all the feeling she could not yet put into words. When she finally pulled back, she said, "You came home. That is all that matters. You came home to me." They spent the rest of the night huddled together by the fire, slowly thawing out and recovering from their ordeal. Owen made hot tea and they shared it from the same cup, passing it back and forth, their hands touching with each exchange. He told her about his journey, how he had been halfway home when the storm hit, how he had almost turned back but the thought of her waiting had driven him forward. He described stumbling through the white blindness, completely lost, until he had seen the glow of light in the distance. He had thought he was hallucinating at first, that his mind was playing tricks, but he had moved toward it anyway, and there she was, standing in the doorway like a beacon guiding him home. "I thought I was going to die out there," he admitted quietly. "I thought I would never see you again. And all I could think was that I had wasted so much time. There were things I needed to tell you, things I needed to ask you, and I was going to die without ever saying them." Greta felt her heart start to beat faster. "What things?" Owen set down the tea and took both her hands in his. They were still shaking slightly, but his grip was firm. "I know we have talked about the future, about staying here together, but I have never really asked you properly. I have never told you what you truly mean to me." He took a deep breath. "When I was out there in the storm, I realized that you are the only home I need. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. You saved me, Greta. Not just tonight, but 6 months ago when you took a chance on a broken human man. You gave me a reason to live again." She felt tears starting to form and she squeezed his hands. "You saved me too. I was so alone before you came, I thought I would spend the rest of my life that way. But you saw me, really saw me, not as an orc or an outcast, but as a person worth knowing. Worth loving," he corrected gently. Then he did something that shocked her. He slid off the bench they were sharing and knelt on the floor in front of her, still holding her hands. "I do not have a ring. I do not have anything valuable to offer you, but I have myself, all of me, for as long as you want me. Greta, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband, officially and forever?" The tears spilled over then, running down her green cheeks. In orc culture, marriage was a simple thing, a declaration before witnesses and an exchange of gifts. But she knew that for humans it was more formal, more ceremonial. The fact that Owen was asking her this way, treating her with the respect and tradition of his people, meant everything. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you." He surged up and kissed her, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. It was fierce and desperate and full of the knowledge that they had both almost lost each other tonight. When they finally broke apart, they were both crying and laughing at the same time, holding each other like they might never let go. They spent the next few days recovering from the blizzard. Greta's fingers and toes had suffered some frostbite, and Owen developed a deep cough from his exposure to the cold, but they tended to each other with patient care. The storm finally blew itself out after 3 days, leaving the world buried in snow and eerily quiet. They dug themselves out slowly, clearing paths to the barn and the well, checking on their animals and supplies. It was during this quiet time that they really talked about what marriage would mean for them. There would be no ceremony in a human church, no orc clan gathering to witness their vows. They were alone in this, as they had been from the beginning, but they decided that maybe that was all right. They would make their own ceremony, their own traditions. They would speak their vows to each other in front of the fire that had kept them warm through so many nights, and that would be enough. They spent a week preparing. Owen carved 2 simple wooden rings since they had no access to metal smiths who would work with them. He worked on them every evening, sanding them smooth and carving tiny patterns into the wood, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Greta prepared a special meal, using the last of their winter stores to make something celebratory. She also went through her small collection of possessions and found her grandmother's silver bracelet, the only thing she had taken from her old life. She decided she would give it to Owen as her wedding gift, a piece of her history offered freely. Owen had little to give her, but he spent hours writing something in the books he had bought, and she knew better than to peek. Whatever he was doing, it was his gift to her, and she would wait to receive it properly. The day they chose for their wedding was bright and cold, the sun glittering off the snow like scattered diamonds. They dressed in their best clothes, which were not saying much, but they had cleaned and mended everything carefully. Greta braided her hair with strips of cloth, and Owen trimmed his beard neatly. They looked at each other across their small cottage and smiled, nervous and excited and ready. They stood together in front of the fireplace, facing each other, hands joined. There was no one to officiate, so they simply spoke from their hearts. Owen went first, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Greta, before I met you, I was a ghost walking through life. I had lost myself in violence and war, and I did not think I deserved happiness or peace. But you showed me that I was wrong. You gave me a home, not just a place to live, but a real home built on trust and care and love. You are the strongest person I know, and the kindest, and I am honored that you would choose to spend your life with me. I promise to stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to protect you and provide for you and respect you. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my days." Greta had to take a moment to compose herself before she could speak. "Owen, you walked into my life when I had given up on connection, on family, on love. I thought being alone was my fate, the price of choosing my own path. But you proved to me that there was another way. You looked past what I am and saw who I am. You made me laugh again. You made me hope again. I promise to be your partner in all things. I promise to care for you and challenge you and choose you every single day. I promise to love you with everything I have, now and always." They exchanged the rings Owen had made, sliding them onto each other's fingers with gentle reverence. The wood was smooth and warm, and Greta thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. Then she gave him her grandmother's bracelet, explaining what it meant to her, how it was the last link to her family. Owen's hands shook as he fastened it around his wrist, understanding the magnitude of the gift. Then he gave her his gift. He picked up the primer he had bought, the one for learning letters, and opened it to the first page. There, in his careful handwriting, he had written an inscription. He read it aloud to her, his voice soft. "For Greta, who taught me that home is not a place but a person. May these books open new worlds for you, and may I be honored to explore them by your side. You are my heart, you are my home, you are my everything. Your husband, Owen." She could not speak through her tears, so she simply pulled him close and held him. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, married now in every way that mattered. Eventually they ate the meal Greta had prepared, toasting each other with honey mead they had been saving. They talked and laughed and kissed, and as the sun set, they went to bed together as husband and wife, and it felt different somehow, more solid, more real. The winter slowly gave way to early spring, and their life together continued in its quiet rhythm. Greta practiced her reading every day, slowly working through the primer, and then moving on to the storybooks Owen had brought her. She discovered a love for tales of adventure and far-off places, and Owen loved watching her face light up as she puzzled out new words and phrases. They worked together to prepare the garden for planting, and they talked about their plans for the coming year. But they both knew their peace could not last forever. The borderlands were called that for a reason, a buffer zone between human and orc territories, and both sides viewed it with suspicion and sometimes hostility. They had been lucky so far, isolated enough that few travelers came their way, but their luck was bound to run out eventually. It happened on a warm day in mid-spring when the first green shoots were pushing up through the soil. Greta was in the garden weeding while Owen repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by the winter snows. They heard the horses before they saw them, the sound of hooves carrying across the quiet land. They both froze, looking at each other, and then Owen was moving, pulling Greta up and toward the cottage. "Go inside," he said urgently. "Lock the door. Do not come out until I tell you it is safe." "No," she said firmly. "I will not hide. This is my home too. Greta, please. If they are human soldiers, they will not understand. They will see you as a threat. And I will not let you face them alone." They did not have time to argue further because the riders appeared over the rise, 6 men in the leather armor of Border Patrol. They saw Owen and Greta standing together, and their faces hardened. They rode up quickly, surrounding them in a loose circle, hands on their weapons. The leader, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, looked between them with disgust. "What is this?" he demanded. "A human consorting with an orc." Owen stepped slightly in front of Greta, his hands open and visible. "This is my wife. We live here peacefully. We want no trouble." The scarred man spat into the dirt. "Wife? You dare to call that creature your wife?" He looked at his men. We have heard rumors of a traitor living in the borderlands, a deserter from the king's army who turned his back on his own kind. Seems we found him." Owen's face went carefully blank, but Greta could feel the tension radiating from him. "I served my time. I was honorably discharged. I have broken no laws." "Except the law against consorting with monsters," another soldier said. He was younger, his face twisted with a zealotry that made Greta's skin crawl. "Orcs killed my brother, killed a lot of good men, and here you are, lying down with one." "She is not responsible for your brother's death," Owen said evenly. "She left her clan because she refused to kill humans. She has done nothing wrong." The scarred leader leaned forward in his saddle. "Except exist. Orcs do not belong in human lands, and humans who protect them are traitors." He looked at Greta with cold eyes. "We could kill you where you stand, Orc. We would be doing the kingdom a service." Greta felt her anger rising, hot and fierce, but Owen's hand found hers and squeezed, a silent plea for calm. She took a breath and forced herself to speak levelly. "I have lived here for over a year. I have harmed no one. I have raided no settlements, killed no travelers. I only want to be left in peace." "Peace," the young soldier scoffed. "What does an orc know of peace? You are all savages and murderers." "She knows more of peace than you ever will," Owen said, and there was steel in his voice now. "She risked everything to choose peace. She gave up her family, her clan, her entire life because she refused to participate in violence. What have you sacrificed for peace? What courage have you shown beyond riding in a pack to threaten a woman in her own home?" The scarred man's hand moved to his sword. "Careful, deserter. You are not in a position to lecture us about courage. I am not a deserter. I completed my service, and I am not afraid of you." The tension stretched tight between them, and Greta knew they were seconds away from violence. She stepped forward, pulling Owen back slightly. "What do you want from us? We have nothing of value. We are just trying to live." "We want you gone," the leader said flatly. "Both of you, out of the borderlands. You have 3 days to pack up and leave. If we find you here after that, we will burn this cottage to the ground with you in it." Owen's jaw tightened. "And where exactly do you expect us to go? The orcs will kill me. The humans will kill her. The borderlands are the only place we can exist together." "Not my problem," the scarred man said. He pulled his horse around, and the other soldiers followed suit. 3 days. "Do not make us come back." They rode off, leaving Owen and Greta standing in the garden, hands still clasped, their world suddenly crumbling around them. They stood there for a long time after the soldiers disappeared, neither knowing what to say. Finally, Owen turned to her, his face anguished. "I am so sorry. This is my fault. If you had not taken me in, if we had not gotten involved, you could stay here safely." "Stop," she said firmly. "This is not your fault. Those men were looking for a reason to hate, and they found one, but I will not regret you. I will never regret us." "What are we going to do?" he asked helplessly. "They meant it. They will come back, and they will kill us if we are still here." Greta looked around at the cottage they had made into a home, at the garden they had planted together, at the life they had built against all odds. She felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest, a refusal to let hate win. "We are not going anywhere. This is our home. We will defend it. Against 6 armed soldiers. Greta, we cannot win that fight." "Maybe not, but I will not run. I ran from my clan. I will not run again." Owen cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "I cannot lose you. If fighting means losing you, then I choose to run. We can go deeper into the borderlands, find somewhere even more remote. We can survive. And how long until someone else finds us? How long until we have to run again?" She shook her head. "There has to be another way." They went inside and spent the rest of the day trying to think of solutions. They could not go to the human authorities because the Border Patrol was the authority out here. They could not appeal to the orc clans because Greta was an outcast and Owen would be killed on sight. They had no friends nearby, no allies who could intervene. They were alone, just as they had always been. That night, lying in bed, Owen held Greta close and whispered into her hair. "Promise me something. If it comes to a fight, if things go badly, you run. You save yourself." "No," she said immediately. "We survive together or not at all. Greta, please. I need to know you will be safe. I need to know that even if I fall, you will keep living." She pulled back to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You made vows to me. You promised to stand by me through whatever comes. I will hold you to that promise, and I expect you to hold me to mine. We are not giving up. Not on each other, not on our home." He kissed her then, desperate and deep, and they made love like it might be the last time, pouring everything they felt into every touch, every kiss. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and neither of them slept much, too aware of the clock ticking down on their 3 days. The next morning, Greta woke with a new determination. If they were going to stay and fight, they needed to be smart about it. She began taking inventory of everything they had that could be used as a weapon or defense. Owen was a trained soldier, and she had grown up learning orc combat techniques. Together, they were not helpless. They spent the day fortifying the cottage, barring the windows more securely, creating barriers they could use for cover. They gathered their tools, their axes and knives, anything that could be used if it came to violence. But even as they prepared, Greta kept thinking there had to be another way. Violence had been what drove her from her clan. She did not want it to define the rest of her life. There had to be something they were missing, some option they had not considered. On the second day, Owen was checking the barn when he called out to Greta urgently. She ran to him, her heart pounding, expecting to find the soldiers had returned early. Instead, she found Owen standing with a stranger, an orc woman who looked to be around Greta's age. She had the same green skin and tusks, but her hair was cut short and she wore traveling clothes that had seen better days. "Greta," the woman said uncertainly. "Is it really you?" Greta stared, her mind racing, and then recognition hit her like a physical blow. Vera. They had grown up together in the same clan, had been friends as children before the expectations of their culture had driven them onto different paths. Vera had always been more interested in healing than fighting, and the last Greta had heard, she had been apprenticed to the clan shaman. What was she doing here? Vera looked between Greta and Owen, taking in the cottage, the garden, the obvious signs of a life built together. "I heard rumors," she said slowly. "Rumors that you were living in the borderlands with a human. I had to see if it was true. The clan says you are dead to them. They would kill you if they found you." "I know," Greta said. "Why are you here, Vera? What do you want to warn you?" Vera said urgently. "The clan is planning a raid into human territory. They will be passing through this area in 2 days. If they find you here, especially with him, they will not show mercy." She looked at Owen with something like pity. "They will kill him and drag you back to face judgment." Greta felt the ground shift beneath her feet. It was not enough that human soldiers wanted them gone. Now her own people were coming. They were caught between 2 sides, each wanting them dead for different reasons. Owen's face had gone pale, but his voice was steady. "How many warriors?" 20, maybe more," Vera said. "Led by your brother Derek. He has sworn to cleanse the borderlands of human filth." She looked at Greta. "I am sorry. I know this is not what you want to hear, but you need to leave, tonight, before either side finds you." "Come with us," Greta said suddenly. "If you are here, if you took the risk to warn me, then you must feel the same way I do. You must be tired of the violence." Vera's eyes filled with tears. "I am so tired, Greta. I have healed so many warriors only to see them go out and create more wounded. I have tried to teach peace, but no one listens. The shaman expelled me last month for refusing to bless the raid. I have nowhere to go." "Then stay with us," Owen said, stepping forward. "We are trying to build something different here, a place where it does not matter if you are human or orc. A place where people can just live. It is not much, but you would be welcome." Vera looked at him with wonder. "You would trust an orc you just met." "Greta trusts you. That is enough for me." The three of them went into the cottage and spent the next hours talking through their options. With Vera's information, they knew they could not stay. The soldiers might return early or the orc raiders might arrive ahead of schedule. They were out of time, but Greta was struck by a new thought. If Vera had left her clan because she believed in peace, maybe there were others. Maybe there were humans who also believed that the violence had to stop. Maybe they did not have to be alone. She shared this thought with Owen and Vera, and they both looked at her like she was mad. But the more she talked, the more the idea took shape. What if they did not run? What if they stood their ground and made their case, not with violence but with words? What if they tried to show both sides that there was another way? It was a desperate plan, and the odds of it working were slim. But as Owen had said to the soldiers, what had they sacrificed for peace? This was their chance to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. They spent the rest of that day and into the night preparing, but not for battle. They prepared arguments, stories, examples of how they had lived together in peace. Vera contributed her perspective, talking about the orc clans and what might sway them. Owen talked about the human soldiers and what might reach through their prejudice. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was something. The morning of the third day dawned clear and bright. They knew the soldiers could arrive at any time to make good on their threat. They also knew the orc raiders could appear from the other direction. So they positioned themselves in the open ground in front of the cottage, the three of them standing together, unarmed, waiting. The soldiers arrived first, riding hard, torches in hand, clearly intending to burn them out. They pulled up short when they saw Greta, Owen, and Vera waiting for them, no weapons visible, no signs of resistance. The scarred leader's face twisted with confusion and then anger. "I told you to be gone," he shouted. "You chose this." "We chose to stay," Owen called back. "We chose to stand for what we believe in, and we ask you to listen before you act." "Listen," the young soldier spat. "Listen to orc lovers, you are both traitors." "We are people trying to live in peace," Greta said, her voice carrying across the distance. "I know orcs have killed humans. I know there is blood and pain on both sides. But I also know that killing me will not bring back anyone you have lost. It will only add more death to the tally." "She is right," Vera added. "I am a healer from the orc clans. I have spent my life trying to mend the wounds of war, but the wounds keep coming because we keep fighting. Someone has to be brave enough to stop. Someone has to be willing to choose peace." The soldiers looked uncomfortable, their certainty wavering. But before anyone could speak further, another sound reached them. The thunder of many feet running, the battle cries of orc warriors. The raiders were coming. The orc warriors burst over the rise, weapons raised, ready for blood. But they too pulled up short when they saw the scene before them. Greta standing with a human and another orc, facing down human soldiers, no battle happening. At the head of the raiders was Darak, Greta's brother, his face a mask of fury. "Greta," he roared, "what is this betrayal?" "No betrayal, brother," she called back. "I am standing for what I believe in. I am choosing peace." "Peace," he spat the word. "You stand with humans and speak of peace. They have killed our people, they have stolen our lands, there can be no peace with them." "And we have killed theirs," Greta countered. "We have raided their villages, slaughtered their families. When does it end, Darak? How many more must die before we admit this is madness?" The two groups faced each other. Orcs on one side, humans on the other, and Greta, Owen, and Vera caught in the middle. It was the moment everything could explode into violence. It was also the moment when everything could change. Owen stepped forward, his voice loud and clear. "I am a veteran of the war in the north. I have killed orcs in battle. I have seen friends die to orc weapons. I understand hatred. I understand the desire for revenge, but I also learned something that you have not yet realized. Hatred is a fire that consumes the one carrying it. Revenge is a poison that spreads. I thought I would never be able to let go of what I had experienced. I thought I would carry that rage until I died." He looked at Greta, and his voice softened. "But then I met someone who showed me another way. She chose peace even when it cost her everything. She chose compassion even when she had every reason to hate, and she saved me. Not just my life, but my soul. She gave me a reason to hope that maybe, just maybe, we do not have to be enemies. Maybe we can be something else." Derek growled low in his throat. Pretty words from a human. But words do not undo the deaths of our people. "No, they do not," Vera said, stepping forward. "But more death will not undo them either. I have healed warriors from our clan, Derek. I have held dying orcs and listened to them cry for their mothers. I have set bones and stitched wounds and tried to make whole what war has broken. And I am telling you, as someone who has seen the true cost of this conflict, that we have to stop. We have to find another way." The scarred soldier spoke up then, his voice uncertain. "My daughter asks me why we fight the orcs. She is 7 years old, and she wants to know why her father comes home covered in blood. I do not know what to tell her anymore. I tell her it is to keep her safe, but is she really safer? Or am I just making more orphans on both sides?" The young soldier who had been so zealous before looked down at his hands. "My brother did die fighting orcs, but he also killed orcs, probably someone else's brother. Does his death matter more than theirs? Am I just supposed to keep hating forever?" One of the orc warriors, an older woman with gray in her hair, lowered her spear. "My son was killed by human soldiers 5 years ago. I have hated humans ever since. But my son would not have wanted more death. He was gentle like Vera. He dreamed of peace." The moment hung in the balance, and Greta knew this was when they would either die or change the world, even if just a little. She took Owen's hand in one of hers and Vera's in the other, and she spoke from her heart. "Look at us. An orc woman who left her clan, a human veteran who walked away from war, and an orc healer who refused to enable violence. We are not heroes. We are just 3 people who decided we wanted something different. But if we can choose peace, so can you, all of you. You do not have to keep fighting. You do not have to keep dying. You can choose to lay down your weapons and go home. You can choose to let others live in peace even if you do not understand them. You can choose to be brave enough to stop." Silence fell over the assembled warriors and soldiers. No one moved. No one spoke. The wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere a bird sang, oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. Then, slowly, the old orc warrior set her spear down on the ground. "I am tired," she said simply. "I do not want to fight anymore." One of the human soldiers, not the scarred leader but one of the older men, sheathed his sword. "Neither do I." Others began to follow suit. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Enough to show that maybe this was possible. The scarred leader looked around at his men, at the orcs doing the same, and something in his face shifted. He did not put away his weapon, but he nodded once, sharp and acknowledging. "We will leave you in peace," he said gruffly. "But if there is trouble, if we hear reports of violence from this area, we will be back." "There will be no violence," Owen promised. "We will keep the peace." Derek still looked furious, but he was watching the old warrior who had put down her spear, and Greta could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he turned to Greta. "You are still dead to the clan. Do not think this changes that." "I know," Greta said quietly, "but maybe someday it will. Maybe someday there will be room in the clan for those who choose peace." He said nothing, just turned and led his warriors away. The human soldiers followed suit, riding off in the opposite direction. Soon it was just Greta, Owen, and Vera standing in the open ground, alive and whole and stunned. They had done it. They had stood their ground and made their case, and somehow, impossibly, both sides had chosen to walk away. It was not a permanent solution. It was not a guarantee of safety. But it was a start. They walked back to the cottage together, their legs shaking with reaction, and collapsed inside. For a long time they just sat there, processing what had happened. Then Owen started to laugh, a slightly hysterical sound, and soon all three of them were laughing and crying at the same time, the tension of the past days finally releasing. "I cannot believe that worked," Vera said, wiping her eyes. "I cannot believe we are alive." "I can," Greta said, looking at Owen, "because we had something worth fighting for, worth standing for." Owen pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "We still do. We always will." Over the next weeks, something unexpected happened. A few more orcs appeared at their cottage, ones who had heard about what happened, who were tired of the violence and wanted to find another way. Some humans also came, families who had been driven from their homes by the fighting and needed a safe place. Greta, Owen, and Vera welcomed them all, and slowly, tentatively, a small community began to form around their cottage. It was not easy. There were tensions and misunderstandings, cultural differences that sometimes erupted into arguments. But everyone who came to them had chosen to be there, had chosen peace, and that made all the difference. They worked together to build new cottages, to expand the garden, to create a space where humans and orcs could coexist not as enemies but as neighbors. Greta continued learning to raid, and she started teaching others, both orc and human children who had never had the opportunity to learn. Owen used his military training to organize defenses, not for attack, but to protect their small community from those who might not understand what they were trying to do. Vera set up a healing house, tending to anyone who needed it regardless of their race. One evening, almost a year after the confrontation that had changed everything, Greta stood in the doorway of their cottage watching the sun set over their growing settlement. Owen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Staying here fighting for this even when it might have been easier to run?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be, with you building something that matters." She turned in his arms to face him. "I am pregnant." His eyes went wide with shock and then joy, and he let out a whoop that probably woke half the settlement. He picked her up and spun her around, and she laughed, her heart full to bursting. When he set her down, he had tears in his eyes. "We are going to have a child," he whispered. "A child who will grow up in a world where orc and human live side by side. A child who will never have to choose between their parents' peoples, because they will belong to both." Greta placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child will be the future we are building. Living proof that peace is possible." The news spread through the settlement quickly, and there was celebration that night, humans and orcs gathering together to toast the couple and the coming child. It felt like a promise, like the universe saying that what they were doing mattered, that it would continue beyond them. The pregnancy was not easy. Greta experienced sickness in the first months, and she worried constantly about whether a half-human, half-orc child would even be possible. But Vera assured her that while rare, such children had been born before in the long history of both peoples. She tended to Greta carefully, using her healing knowledge to make the pregnancy as comfortable as possible. Owen was both excited and terrified. He read everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth, pestering Vera with questions until she finally banned him from the healing house for a week to give herself a break. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving protective symbols from both human and orc traditions into the wood. He talked to Greta's stomach every night, telling their unborn child stories about their parents and the community they were building. As Greta's belly grew, so did the settlement. More families arrived, drawn by stories of the peaceful community in the borderlands. They built a common house for gatherings and meals, a school where children of both races learned together, and a council that included both orc and human elders to make decisions for the community. It was still small, still fragile, but it was real. Greta went into labor on a spring evening when the world smelled of rain and new growth. Vera and 2 other women, 1 orc and 1 human, attended to her while Owen paced outside, forbidden from the birthing room by tradition on both sides. It was a long labor, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Vera worried they might lose both mother and child. But Greta was strong, had always been strong, and she fought her way through the pain with a stubbornness that made Vera smile even as she worked. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a baby's cry filled the air. Vera cleaned and wrapped the infant carefully, then brought it to Greta, who was exhausted but smiling. "A daughter," Vera said softly. "A beautiful, healthy daughter." Greta looked down at the tiny face, seeing Owen's dark eyes and her own green-tinted skin, a perfect blend of both their heritages. She counted 10 fingers and 10 toes, noted the tiny nubs that might become tusks or might not, and fell completely in love. They let Owen in then, and his face when he saw his daughter was something Greta would treasure forever. He reached out with trembling hands to touch the baby's cheek, tears streaming down his face. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is absolutely perfect." They named her Mira, after Owen's mother who had died when he was young, and Vera blessed her in both human and orc traditions, calling down protection and peace on the child who represented the future of both peoples. The whole settlement celebrated, gathering outside the cottage to welcome the newest member of their community. As Mira grew, she became the heart of the settlement in ways Greta had never expected. She toddled between human and orc adults with equal ease, learning words in both languages, playing with children of both races. She saw no division, no reason to treat anyone differently based on their skin color or tusks. She was what they were all fighting for, proof that the next generation could be better. The years passed, and the settlement grew. They established trade with some of the nearby human towns and even cautiously with some of the orc clans. There were still those who opposed what they were doing, still attacks from extremists on both sides, but they weathered each storm together. Their community became known throughout the borderlands as a place of peace, and slowly, very slowly, attitudes began to shift. Greta and Owen had 2 more children, a son named Marcus who had his mother's strength and his father's gentleness, and another daughter named Kira who was fierce and brave and determined to change the world. They raised their children to be proud of both their heritages, to see their mixed blood not as a weakness, but as a strength. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Greta had stood in the doorway holding the door open through the blizzard. Owen planned a surprise for her. He had the whole community help, and when Greta came back from the garden that evening, she found their cottage decorated with flowers and candles. Owen was waiting for her, dressed in his best clothes, that wooden ring she had given him still on his finger though it was worn smooth from years of wear. "You remember this day 10 years ago?" he asked, taking her hand. You stood in a blizzard for 3 hours waiting for me to come home. You nearly froze to death because you would not give up on me. I remember, she said softly. I would do it again. I know you would. That is who you are, stubborn and brave and loyal to the core. He pulled her close. You have given me a life I never imagined possible. A home, a family, a purpose. Every day I wake up grateful that I stumbled into your life that spring day 6 months before the blizzard. I am grateful too, she said. You taught me that I did not have to be alone, that love was possible even across the greatest divides. They renewed their vows that night in front of their community, their children standing beside them, and it felt even more meaningful than the first time. They had proven that what they promised to each other that day was not just words, but a commitment they would honor for the rest of their lives. As they stood together under the stars, surrounded by the community they had built, Greta thought about how far they had come. From two lonely souls trying to survive in the borderlands to the founders of a settlement that represented hope for a better future. It had not been easy. There had been pain and loss and moments when she had thought they would not make it. But they had persevered together, and that had made all the difference. She looked at Owen, still handsome despite the gray threading through his hair, his face lined with laughter and worry in equal measure. She saw the love in his eyes, as strong now as it had been that first night they had admitted their feelings. And she knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones, that she would make the same choices again. She would choose him every time. The settlement continued to thrive. Their children grew and had children of their own, continuing the work their parents had started. The borderlands slowly transformed from a place of conflict to a place of connection, where humans and orcs met not as enemies but as partners in building a shared future. It was not perfect. There were still prejudices to overcome, still wounds that needed healing. But the foundation had been laid, and it was strong. Greta and Owen grew old together, watching their grandchildren play in the gardens they had first planted so many years ago. They told stories of the early days, of standing unarmed between two armies, of choosing peace when violence would have been easier. And the children listened, learning that courage was not just about fighting but about standing firm in your beliefs, even when the world told you that you were wrong. On a quiet evening in late autumn, when the leaves were turning gold and the air had that sharp quality that promised winter, Greta and Owen sat together on the bench in front of their cottage. The same cottage where she had stood in the doorway through a blizzard, where they had made their vows, where they had raised their children. Greta leaned her head on Owen's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they watched the sun set over the community they had built together. "Do you think we made a difference?" Greta asked, her voice soft with age but still strong. Owen squeezed her gently. "We changed the world, maybe not the whole world but our corner of it, and that matters." "It does," she agreed. "We gave people hope. We showed them that peace was possible." "We showed them that love was possible," Owen corrected. "Everything else grew from that." She turned to look at him, this human man who had become her whole world. "I love you, Owen Nakamura. I have loved you from the moment you asked if you could repair my fence in exchange for meals. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Greta Nakamura," he said, using the name she had taken when they married. "You are my heart, my home, my everything. You saved me in that blizzard, and you have been saving me every day since." They sat together as the darkness fell, wrapped in blankets and each other, content with the life they had built. Behind them, the lights of the settlement twinkled, families gathering for evening meals, children playing their last games before bed, the sounds of a community at peace. And in front of them stretched the borderlands they had made their home, no longer a place of division, but a bridge between two peoples who had learned, slowly and painfully, that they had more in common than they had different. It was a good life, built on love and stubbornness, and the willingness to stand in a blizzard for 3 hours because the person you loved was out there in the storm. It was a life worth every sacrifice, every struggle, every moment of doubt. It was a life that proved that sometimes one act of love could change everything. And when spring came again, as it always did, the gardens would bloom with flowers planted by human and orc hands working together, a living testament to what Greta and Owen had started all those years ago. Their story would continue in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had nurtured, in the peace they had fought so hard to create. It was a story of hope and love conquering hate, of two people who refused to let the world tell them that their love was wrong. They had built something beautiful from nothing, and it would endure long after they were gone, a beacon of possibility for anyone brave enough to believe that peace was worth fighting for, that love could bridge any divide, and that sometimes the most courageous thing a person could do was simply hold the door open and wait for someone they loved to come home.